The parking lot outside McDonald's. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt. The scene was chaotic. Police cars with their lights flashing, curious onlookers gathered near the entrance, and Ethan Parker sitting quietly beside his increasingly anxious mother, Laura. Despite the commotion around them, Ethan seemed oddly calm, clutching his toy soldier as if it were a lifeline. Chuck Norris stood nearby, his arms crossed and his brow furrowed in deep thought. He had already explained to the officers what happened inside the restaurant, that Ethan had whispered something shocking, but he hadn't shared the exact details yet. The two officers, one named Officer Ramirez and the other Officer Bennett, exchanged skeptical glances. They weren't sure whether to take this seriously or dismiss it as some kind of misunderstanding. "Mr. Norris," Officer Ramirez began cautiously, "can you tell us exactly what the boy said? We need to understand why you called Homeland Security." Chuck hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "It's not something I can explain easily," he admitted. "But trust me, when I heard it, I knew we had to act fast. This isn't just about a kid saying something unusual. It's bigger than that." Officer Bennett raised an eyebrow. "Bigger how? Are we talking about a crime, a threat?" Chuck shook his head. "Not exactly, it's complicated. Let's just say Ethan knows things he shouldn't. Things most adults wouldn't even believe." Laura stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "What did you tell him, Ethan?" she asked, kneeling down so she could look her son in the eyes. "Please, honey, you have to tell me." Ethan blinked up at her, his blue eyes wide and innocent. "I told him the bad men are coming back tomorrow night," he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "And they're bringing monsters with them." The officers stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or take him seriously. Officer Ramirez cleared his throat awkwardly. Bad men and monsters? That sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it?" Chuck cut in sharply. "Don't underestimate him," he warned. "This isn't a game. Whatever Ethan knows, it's real, and we don't have much time." To prove his point, Chuck recounted some of the specific details Ethan had whispered to him earlier. Details about military operations, classified missions and locations that hadn't been made public. As he spoke, the officers' expressions shifted from skepticism to alarm. Even Laura looked stunned, her hand covering her mouth as she listened. "How? Does he know all this?" Officer Bennett muttered under his breath, glancing at Ethan nervously. "I don't know," Chuck replied. "But I do know one thing. If we ignore this, people will die." By evening, the situation had escalated. News of the mysterious incident spread quickly through the local police department, reaching higher authorities. Within hours, a team of federal agents arrived at the scene, led by a stern-looking man named Agent Daniel Harper. He wore a dark suit and carried himself with an air of authority that demanded respect. After introducing himself, he wasted no time getting to work. "Let's start from the beginning," Agent Harper said, addressing Chuck and Laura. "Can you walk me through everything that happened today?" Chuck nodded and repeated the story, emphasizing the urgency of Ethan's warning. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, the boy surprised everyone by remaining composed. He answered Agent Harper's questions calmly, providing more unsettling information about the bad men and their plans. "They'll attack during the night," Ethan explained. "They wait until everyone is asleep because it makes it easier for them. But they're weakest when the sun comes up. That's when we can stop them." Agent Harper scribbled notes furiously, his expression unreadable. "Do you know where they'll strike first?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "Here, in Austin. But they'll move to other cities after that." The gravity of the situation began to sink in. If Ethan's warnings were true, and given the specificity of his knowledge, it was hard to dismiss them outright. The entire city could be in danger. Agent Harper immediately contacted his superiors requesting additional resources and reinforcements. Meanwhile, Chuck insisted on staying involved, refusing to leave Ethan's side. "I'm not leaving this kid," Chuck declared firmly. "If he trusts me enough to share his secret, then I'm seeing this through to the end." Laura, overwhelmed by fear and confusion, clung to her son protectively. "Why is this happening?" she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. Why my boy? No one had an answer for her. For now, all they could do was prepare for the worst. As night fell over Austin, strange occurrences began unfolding across the city. Power grids flickered unpredictably, causing streetlights to dim and traffic signals to malfunction. Residents reported hearing eerie noises coming from empty fields and abandoned buildings. Some claimed to see shadowy figures moving swiftly through the darkness, though no one could confirm what or who they were. At a makeshift command center set up in a nearby government building, officials worked tirelessly to piece together Ethan's cryptic warnings. Maps of the city were spread out on tables, marked with potential targets based on the boy's descriptions. Military personnel coordinated with law enforcement agencies, readying themselves for whatever might come next. Back at home, Laura tried to keep Ethan occupied with books and puzzles, hoping to distract him from the growing tension. But the boy remained eerily focused, often staring out the window as if waiting for something to happen. When she asked him what he was thinking about, he simply replied, "The sunrise." Chuck visited later that night, bringing pizza and reassurance. "We're doing everything we can," he told Laura, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You've got nothing to worry about. We'll keep you both safe." But despite his confidence, Chuck couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Something big was coming, and they needed to be ready. Early the next morning, just before dawn, the first signs of trouble appeared. A series of explosions rocked the outskirts of Austin, sending plumes of smoke into the sky. Emergency sirens blared throughout the city as panicked residents scrambled for shelter. On the horizon, strange shapes moved against the fading darkness. Shapes that defied explanation. Through it all, Ethan remained calm, almost as if he had seen this moment countless times before. When Agent Harper rushed into the room, breathless and wide-eyed, Ethan looked up and said, "It's starting." "What's starting?" Harper asked urgently. "The invasion," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "They're here." For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Then chaos erupted as phones rang, radios crackled, and orders were shouted. Outside, the battle for humanity's survival had begun, and Ethan Parker, the 5-year-old boy who knew too much, was at the center of it all. Despite the fear and uncertainty swirling around them, Chuck Norris stood firm, determined to protect the child who had changed everything. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The world would never forget the day a little boy whispered a warning that saved millions. It was a quiet afternoon at the local McDonald's in Austin, Texas. The air inside was warm and smelled of fries, burgers, and ketchup packets. Families filled the restaurant, their laughter blending with the soft hum of background music playing over the speakers. Parents sipped coffee while keeping an eye on their kids, who were either busy eating or running around the play area. Everything seemed normal, just another day at the fast food chain. In one corner of the room, sitting alone at a small table near the window, was Chuck Norris. Yes, the Chuck Norris. The legendary martial artist and actor wasn't wearing anything flashy. Just jeans, a plaid shirt, and boots, but his presence still commanded attention. A few people glanced at him from time to time, whispering to each other about how cool it was to see him here. Some wanted to ask for autographs or take pictures, but they held back, not wanting to bother him during his meal. Chuck didn't seem to mind being recognized. He smiled politely whenever someone made eye contact, then went back to enjoying his burger and fries. At another table nearby, a young boy named Ethan Parker sat with his mom, Laura. Ethan was only 5 years old, with messy blonde hair that stuck out in every direction, and bright blue eyes full of curiosity. He wore a red t-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it, and held a toy action figure in one hand, a tiny plastic soldier he had been playing with all day. Laura, a kind woman in her early 30s, was trying to finish her salad while keeping an eye on her energetic son. "Mommy, look," Ethan said suddenly, pointing toward Chuck Norris. Isn't that Chuck Norris?" Laura looked up from her food and followed her son's finger. Sure enough, there he was. She chuckled softly. "Yes, sweetie, I think it is." Ethan's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Can I go say hi, please?" he begged, bouncing slightly in his seat. Laura hesitated. She didn't want to interrupt the famous man's lunch, but she also knew how much Ethan admired Chuck Norris. His bedroom walls were covered in posters of the action star, and he loved watching old movies featuring him. Finally, she sighed and nodded. "Okay, but be polite, all right?" "Yes," Ethan exclaimed, jumping down from his chair. He grabbed his toy soldier tightly in one hand, as if it gave him courage, and started walking toward Chuck's table. Laura watched nervously, hoping her son wouldn't embarrass himself, or worse, annoy the celebrity. As Ethan approached, Chuck noticed the little boy standing shyly a few feet away. He put down his burger and wiped his mouth with a napkin before smiling warmly. "Hey there, buddy," he said in his deep, calm voice. "What's your name?" Ethan," the boy stammered, clutching his toy even tighter. Despite his nervousness, he managed to step closer. "I'm a big fan of yours." Chuck grinned. "Well, thank you, Ethan, that means a lot." He gestured for the boy to sit across from him. "Do you want to join me for a minute?" Ethan slid into the empty chair without hesitation. For a moment, he simply stared at Chuck, awestruck. Then, after taking a deep breath, he leaned forward slightly and whispered something into Chuck's ear. Whatever it was, it lasted only a few seconds, but its impact was immediate. Chuck froze. His smile vanished, replaced by an expression of shock and disbelief. His jaw dropped ever so slightly, and his hands trembled as they gripped the edge of the table. The color drained from his face, making him look pale under the fluorescent lights. Across the room, Laura noticed the change in Chuck's demeanor and frowned, wondering what could have possibly happened. Without saying a word, Chuck reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly as he dialed a number. When someone answered on the other end, Chuck spoke in a low, urgent tone. "This is Chuck Norris. I need Homeland Security involved immediately. There's something you all need to know." The weight of his words sent ripples through the room. People nearby stopped talking and turned to look at him, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. Laura stood up from her table and hurried over to her son. "Ethan, come here," she said firmly, reaching out to grab his arm. But Ethan didn't budge. Instead, he continued staring at Chuck, his wide blue eyes unblinking. "What did you tell him?" Laura asked, her voice tinged with worry. Ethan shrugged innocently. "Just something important." Chuck ended the call and looked at Ethan again, this time with a mixture of fear and respect. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. The boy nodded. "Yes, sir." Before anyone could ask more questions, 2 police officers entered the restaurant. They scanned the room until their eyes landed on Chuck, who waved them over. One of the officers, a tall man with short brown hair, stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Norris, what's going on here?" he asked. Chuck pointed at Ethan. "That boy knows something," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Something we all need to hear." The officer exchanged glances with his partner, clearly unsure what to make of the situation. Meanwhile, whispers spread among the other customers. Some speculated that Ethan might have witnessed a crime, while others joked that Chuck was just being dramatic. Laura, however, felt a growing sense of unease. Her son was smart, yes, but he was still just a child. What could he possibly know that would warrant such a reaction? "Let's talk somewhere private," the second officer suggested. Chuck agreed, and together they gathered Ethan and Laura and headed outside to the parking lot. There, surrounded by curious onlookers and flashing squad car lights, the real story began to unfold. But no one, not even Chuck Norris, could have predicted just how far-reaching and dangerous Ethan's secret truly was. The sun had barely risen over Austin, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, but the city was already in chaos. The explosions from the night before had left scars, burnt patches of land on the outskirts, shattered windows in buildings, and frightened faces everywhere. People huddled together in shelters or stayed glued to their TVs and phones, desperate for updates about what was happening. No one knew who or what was behind the attacks, but everyone agreed on one thing. This wasn't a natural disaster. Something far worse was at play. At the heart of it all was Ethan Parker, the 5-year-old boy whose quiet whispers had set off alarms across the country. He sat in a secure underground bunker alongside his mother, Laura, Chuck Norris, Agent, Daniel Harper, and a small team of military personnel. The bunker was dimly lit, its walls lined with monitors displaying live footage of the unfolding crisis. Maps of the city were pinned to corkboards, marked with red circles indicating areas hit by the mysterious invaders. Soldiers moved quickly, barking orders and preparing weapons as tension filled the air. Ethan didn't seem fazed by any of it. While others paced nervously or whispered urgently into radios, he sat cross-legged on the floor, playing with his toy soldier. Occasionally, he'd glance up at the screens showing strange, shadowy figures moving through the streets, but he never said a word unless someone asked him a question. Even then, his answers were short and direct, almost mechanical. "Ethan," Agent Harper said, kneeling down beside him. "Can you tell us anything else? Anything that might help us stop them?" The boy looked up, his blue eyes meeting Harper's without hesitation. "They're weakest during sunrise," he repeated, his voice calm and steady. "That's when we can hurt them the most." Harper frowned. "But how do we fight them? Do they have weaknesses? Weak spots?" Ethan nodded. "Yes. Their heads glow bright when they're strong, but if you hit them there, they'll fall apart. And don't let them touch you, they'll make you sick." Everyone in the room exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't information a normal child would know. It sounded like something out of a sci-fi movie. Yet no one dared to doubt Ethan, not after everything he'd predicted so far. Chuck Norris leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the boy closely. There was something unsettling about how much Ethan seemed to understand. It wasn't just the details. It was the way he delivered them, as if recounting events he'd lived through himself. Chuck couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan wasn't entirely human, or at least not anymore. "Do you think he's been touched by them?" Laura whispered to Chuck later, her voice trembling. She hadn't slept all night, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. "Is that why he knows so much?" Chuck shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But whatever's going on, we need to trust him. He hasn't steered us wrong yet." As the morning progressed, the invaders revealed themselves more clearly. They weren't human, nor were they machines, at least not entirely. Towering creatures with metallic limbs and glowing eyes roamed the streets, smashing cars and tearing apart buildings with ease. Some carried weapons that fired beams of light, while others simply reached out with clawed hands to snatch people away. Witnesses described them as biomechanical monsters, part alien and part machine, designed for destruction. General Matthew Owens, a grizzled veteran tasked with leading the defense effort, stood in front of a large screen displaying images of the creatures. His face was grim as he addressed the group. "These things are unlike anything we've ever seen," he said, pointing to one of the photos. "We're dealing with advanced technology here, maybe even extraterrestrial. If we don't act fast, they'll wipe us out completely. What's the plan?" Harper asked, gripping the back of a chair tightly. Owens turned to Ethan. "You said they're weakest during sunrise. That gives us a window of opportunity. We'll launch a coordinated attack using modified fighter jets equipped with electromagnetic pulses. Ground teams will move in afterward to clean up whatever's left." "And the civilians?" Laura asked, her voice breaking slightly. "What happens to them?" "We're evacuating as many as possible," Owens replied. "But we can't save everyone. Not unless we stop these things first." Chuck stepped forward. "I'm coming with you," he announced firmly. "If this kid trusts me enough to share his secret, then I'm seeing this through to the end." Owens hesitated but eventually nodded. "All right, Norris, you're with us. But stay close. We don't have time for heroics." Preparations for the attack moved swiftly. Fighter jets were prepped and loaded with experimental EMP devices designed to disable the invaders' technology. Ground troops gathered in armored vehicles, armed with high-powered rifles and grenades. Everyone knew the stakes. Failure meant the end of humanity as they knew it. Ethan watched silently as the soldiers prepared to leave. When Chuck approached him, The boy looked up and handed him his toy soldier. "Take this," Ethan said softly. "It'll keep you safe." Chuck smiled faintly and accepted the toy, slipping it into his pocket. "Thanks, buddy. We'll be back soon." Laura hugged her son tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Be careful," she pleaded, looking at both Chuck and the soldiers. "Please bring him back to me." "We will," Chuck promised. Then, without another word, he climbed into an armored vehicle alongside General Owens and the rest of the team. The attack began just as the sun crested the horizon, bathing the city in golden light. Fighter jets soared overhead, releasing bursts of electromagnetic energy that caused the invaders' glowing heads to flicker and dim. On the ground, soldiers advanced cautiously, targeting the weakened creatures with precise shots aimed at their glowing cores. One by one, the monsters collapsed, their bodies disintegrating into ash. Chuck fought alongside the troops, his years of martial arts training making him a formidable opponent. He moved with precision, striking down any creature that got too close. Despite the danger, he kept Ethan's words in mind. Avoid being touched, aim for the glowing heads. Each successful hit brought them closer to victory. But the battle wasn't easy. The invaders adapted quickly, regrouping and launching counterattacks. Several soldiers fell, injured or worse, as the creatures unleashed devastating blasts of energy. Just when it seemed like the tide might turn against them, reinforcements arrived, additional troops and vehicles sent by neighboring cities eager to help. Through it all, Ethan remained eerily calm. Back in the bunker, he stared at the monitors, tracking the progress of the fight. Laura tried to distract him with snacks and games, but he refused to look away. "They're winning," he murmured at one point, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Just like last time." "Last time?" Laura repeated, her voice shaking. "What do you mean, last time?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he continued watching, his expression unreadable. By mid-morning, the tide had finally turned. The invaders retreated, their numbers decimated by the combined efforts of humanity's defenders. The streets of Austin lay in ruins, littered with debris and the remnants of the biomechanical creatures. Exhausted but victorious, the soldiers regrouped, tending to their wounded and celebrating their hard-fought win. Chuck returned to the bunker covered in dust and sweat, but alive. He knelt beside Ethan and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said. "We couldn't have done it without you." Ethan shrugged modestly. "I just told you what I saw. It wasn't that hard." Laura hugged her son tightly, sobbing with relief. "You saved us," she whispered. "You saved everyone." But even as the immediate threat faded, questions lingered. How had Ethan known so much? Where had he gotten his knowledge? And perhaps most importantly, what did the future hold now that the invaders had been driven back? For now, though, there was peace and hope. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over the battered city, Chuck Norris made a silent promise to himself. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would protect Ethan and uncover the truth behind the boy's extraordinary gift. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The world owed its survival to a 5-year-old boy who had whispered a warning that changed everything. The aftermath of the battle left Austin in a state of shock and awe. The streets were quiet now, except for the distant hum of cleanup crews and emergency vehicles working tirelessly to restore some semblance of order. Buildings lay in ruins, their shattered windows and crumbled walls standing as grim reminders of the chaos that had unfolded just hours before. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was a sense of relief, a fragile hope that humanity had narrowly escaped extinction. Inside the bunker, Ethan Parker sat quietly, his small frame dwarfed by the large monitors displaying images of the devastated city. His toy soldier rested on the table beside him, its plastic surface scratched from being handled so much. Laura, his mother, hovered nearby, her eyes red from crying, but filled with gratitude. She couldn't stop looking at her son, marveling at how someone so young could have played such a pivotal role in saving millions of lives. Chuck Norris leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, and his expression thoughtful. He hadn't spoken much since returning from the battlefield, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. The boy's knowledge had been invaluable, but it also raised unsettling possibilities. How did Ethan know about the invaders' weaknesses? Why did he seem so calm, almost detached during the entire ordeal? And what did he mean when he said, "just like last time"? Agent Daniel Harper entered the room, holding a clipboard and looking exhausted. "We've secured the area for now," he announced. "The remaining invaders fled and we're tracking their movements. But this isn't over. We need to figure out where they came from, and why." Everyone nodded solemnly. The victory felt hollow without answers. They had won the battle, but the war was far from finished. Later that day, General Matthew Owens called a meeting in the bunker to discuss next steps. Soldiers, scientists, and government officials gathered around a large table, their faces etched with fatigue and determination. At the center of it all sat Ethan, who looked completely unfazed by the attention. He swung his legs back and forth under the chair, humming softly to himself as if he were waiting for a school bus instead of participating in a high-stakes strategy session. "Ethan," Owens began gently, leaning forward. "You've helped us more than anyone can imagine, but we need to understand what you know. Can you tell us anything else about these creatures?" Ethan tilted his head slightly, considering the question. "They're not from here," he said simply. "They come from somewhere far away, a place with no sun." "No sun?" Harper repeated, scribbling notes furiously. "Like outer space?" Ethan shrugged. "Maybe. I don't know exactly. But they hate light. That's why they attack at night." Owens exchanged a glance with Chuck, who nodded slowly. It made sense. Everything Ethan had predicted so far had proven accurate. If the invaders hated sunlight, then humanity's best chance of survival was to exploit that weakness. "What about their technology?" another officer asked. "How do they operate?" "They use machines," Ethan replied. "Big ones and small ones. The big ones fly and the small ones crawl. They're controlled by the creatures, but sometimes they work alone." This revelation sent a ripple through the room. If the machines could function independently, then even defeating the creatures wouldn't guarantee safety. Humanity would need to develop countermeasures quickly to neutralize both threats. Harper turned to one of the scientists. "Can we analyze the wreckage? See if we can reverse engineer their tech?" The scientist hesitated. "It's possible, but it'll take time. Their technology is unlike anything we've seen before. We'll need experts from multiple fields working around the clock." Time was something they didn't have. Everyone knew the invaders would regroup and return stronger. The question was, when? As the meeting continued, Laura pulled Chuck aside. Her voice was low but urgent. "There's something wrong with him," she whispered, glancing at Ethan. "He's not acting like a normal kid. He hasn't cried once, not even when those things were attacking. And the way he talks, it's like he's reading from a script." Chuck sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've noticed it too," he admitted. "But whatever's going on with him, it saved us. We owe him our lives." Laura shook her head, tears welling up again. "I'm scared, Chuck. What if he's not my son anymore? What if he's something else?" Before Chuck could respond, Ethan walked over, interrupting their conversation. "Don't worry, Mom," he said softly. "I'm still me. Just different." Laura froze, staring at him. "What do you mean, different?" Ethan didn't elaborate. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. For a moment, Laura felt a flicker of hope. Maybe her son was still in there, buried beneath whatever changes had taken place. That evening, the group decided to move Ethan and his mother to a safer location, an undisclosed military base equipped with advanced security measures. Chuck insisted on accompanying them, unwilling to leave the boys' side. As they drove through the desolate streets of Austin, Ethan pressed his face against the car window, watching the ruins pass by. "It looks bad," he murmured. But it'll get better. How do you know? Laura asked, her voice trembling. Ethan smiled faintly. Because it always does. His words were cryptic yet oddly comforting. Despite everything, he exuded a quiet confidence that seemed to reassure those around him. Even Chuck, who prided himself on staying grounded, found himself believing in the boy's optimism. At the military base, they were greeted by a team of researchers eager to study Ethan's abilities. One of them, Dr. Emily Grant, approached cautiously, introducing herself with a warm smile. "Hi, Ethan," she said. "I'd like to ask you a few questions if that's okay." Ethan nodded. "Okay." Over the next several hours, Dr. Grant conducted a series of tests, asking Ethan to recall specific details about the invaders and their tactics. To everyone's amazement, his memory was flawless. He described events and locations with pinpoint accuracy, often correcting maps and diagrams based on information only he seemed to possess. But the most startling discovery came when Dr. Grant administered a basic cognitive assessment. Ethan's brain activity showed patterns unlike anything she'd ever encountered. It was as if his mind operated on a higher level, processing vast amounts of data simultaneously. When she shared her findings with the others, the room fell silent. "This isn't natural," Dr. Grant concluded. "His cognitive abilities are off the charts. He's either evolved beyond human limits, or he's been altered somehow." The implications were staggering. If Ethan had been changed by the invaders, then he might hold the key to understanding their motives and stopping them permanently. As night fell, Chuck sat outside the base, staring up at the stars. He thought about everything that had happened, the battles, the sacrifices, and the unexplainable presence of a 5-year-old boy who seemed to know the future. It was overwhelming, but also inspiring. Humanity had faced its darkest hour and emerged victorious, thanks in large part to Ethan. "You really care about him, don't you?" Laura's voice broke the silence. She stood a few feet away, wrapped in a blanket. Chuck nodded. "Yeah, I do. He's special, Laura. Not just because of what he knows, but because of who he is. He's brave, smart, and kind. Traits like that don't come along every day." Laura smiled faintly. "Thank you for protecting him. I don't know what I'd do without you." Chuck stood up, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out together. Whatever happens next, we'll face it as a team." Unbeknownst to them, Ethan watched from a nearby window, his blue eyes reflecting the starlight. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The invaders would return, stronger and angrier than before. But he also knew something else. Something he hadn't told anyone yet. Humanity wasn't alone in this fight. There were others like him, scattered across the world, each carrying fragments of knowledge meant to guide and protect. Together, they formed a network, a beacon of hope in the face of darkness. And though the challenges ahead were daunting, Ethan believed, one sunrise at a time, they would prevail. The days following the attack passed in a blur of activity. The military base buzzed with energy as scientists, soldiers, and government officials worked around the clock to prepare for the inevitable return of the invaders. Dr. Emily Grant led the effort to study Ethan's unique abilities, hoping to unlock the secrets hidden within his mind. Meanwhile, General Matthew Owens coordinated defensive strategies, ensuring that every available resource was dedicated to protecting humanity. Ethan, however, remained calm throughout it all. He spent most of his time either playing quietly with his toy soldier or sitting by the window staring at the horizon. To the adults around him, he seemed almost otherworldly, detached from the chaos, yet deeply connected to its outcome. His mother, Laura, tried to keep him occupied with books and games, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her son was waiting for something big. Chuck Norris stayed close to Ethan, acting as both protector and confidant. The bond between them had grown stronger over the past few days, forged in the fires of uncertainty and shared purpose. Chuck often found himself marveling at the boy's resilience. Despite everything, Ethan carried himself with a quiet confidence that inspired those around him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan turned to Chuck and said, "They're coming back tomorrow." Chuck froze, his heart skipping a beat. "How do you know?" "They always come back," Ethan replied matter-of-factly. "But this time, they'll bring more friends." The news sent shockwaves through the base. Emergency meetings were called and preparations intensified. Soldiers double-checked their weapons, engineers fine-tuned the EMP devices, and pilots rehearsed flight patterns. Everyone knew what was at stake. Failure meant the end of humanity. The next morning arrived with an eerie stillness. The sky was cloudless and the air felt heavy, as if nature itself was holding its breath. At dawn, the first signs of trouble appeared. Strange lights flickered on the horizon, growing brighter and closer with each passing minute. Soon, the unmistakable shapes of the biomechanical creatures emerged, accompanied by swarms of smaller drones buzzing like angry insects. This time, the invaders came in greater numbers, their glowing eyes piercing through the early morning light. They moved with purpose, targeting key locations across the city. Buildings crumbled under their assault and panicked screams echoed through the streets. It was clear that they had learned from their previous defeat and were determined not to make the same mistakes again. Inside the base, General Owens issued orders with precision. Fighter jets launched into the sky, releasing EMP bursts that temporarily disabled the invaders' technology. Ground teams advanced cautiously, using sunlight to their advantage. Every soldier carried a weapon modified to target the creatures. Glowing cores, thanks to Ethan's earlier advice. Chuck fought alongside the troops, his movements fluid and deliberate. Years of martial arts training made him a formidable opponent, even against the towering biomechanical beasts. He relied on instinct and teamwork, striking down enemies while keeping an eye on his comrades. Despite the overwhelming odds, he refused to give up. Back at the base, Ethan watched the battle unfold on a large monitor. His expression remained calm, though his fingers gripped the edge of the table tightly. Laura stood beside him, her hands clasped together in prayer. She wanted to shield her son from the horrors of war, but deep down she knew he understood far more than she ever could. "They're winning," Ethan murmured suddenly, breaking the silence. "Just like last time." "Last time?" Laura repeated, her voice trembling. "What do you mean, last time?" Ethan hesitated, then looked up at her. "I've seen this before," he admitted softly. "Not here, but somewhere else, a long time ago." Laura's eyes widened in shock. You remember another life?" Ethan nodded. "Sort of. I don't know how or why, but I do. And I know we're going to win again." Before Laura could respond, alarms blared throughout the base. The invaders had breached the outer defenses, forcing everyone to scramble for cover. Soldiers rushed to secure the perimeter while scientists worked frantically to protect their equipment. Chaos reigned supreme. But amidst the turmoil, Ethan remained steadfast. As the battle raged on, Chuck found himself face to face with one of the largest creatures he'd ever seen. Its metallic body gleamed in the sunlight, and its glowing core pulsed with malevolent energy. The creature roared, raising a clawed hand to strike. Chuck dodged just in time, rolling to his feet and delivering a powerful kick to its leg. Sparks flew as metal bent under the force of his blow. The creature retaliated, swinging wildly and forcing Chuck to retreat. He grabbed a discarded EMP device from the ground and hurled it at the creature's chest. The device exploded in a burst of electromagnetic energy, causing the creature's core to flicker and dim. Seizing the opportunity, Chuck leapt forward and delivered a final devastating punch to the glowing core. With a deafening screech, the creature collapsed, its body dissolving into ash. Breathing heavily, Chuck scanned the battlefield. The tide was turning. Thanks to Ethan's guidance and humanity's determination, the invaders were being pushed back once more. One by one, the creatures fell, their glowing eyes extinguished forever. By midday, the invaders retreated, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Exhausted but victorious, the soldiers regrouped, tending to their wounded and celebrating their hard-fought win. The city of Austin lay in ruins, but hope lingered in the hearts of its survivors. Humanity had endured another test and emerged stronger for it. At the base, Ethan sat quietly, watching the monitors display images of the retreating invaders. His toy soldier rested in his lap, its plastic surface scratched from use. Laura knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. "You saved us," she whispered. "You saved everyone." Ethan shrugged modestly. "I just told you what I saw. It wasn't that hard." Chuck approached, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said. "We couldn't have done it without you." Ethan smiled faintly. "Thanks, Chuck, but this isn't over. Not yet." "What do you mean?" Laura asked, her voice tinged with fear. Ethan hesitated, then looked at her. "There are others like me," he explained. "Others who know things they shouldn't. We're part of something bigger, a network that helps people when they need it most." Laura stared at him, overwhelmed by the revelation. "So you're not alone?" "No," Ethan replied. "And neither are you." In the weeks that followed, life began to return to normal, or as close to normal as possible after such a catastrophic event. Scientists continued studying Ethan's abilities, hoping to learn more about the mysterious network he mentioned. Military leaders developed new strategies to defend against future attacks, while civilians rebuilt their homes and communities. Chuck D. remained a constant presence in Ethan's life, serving as both mentor and friend. Together they became symbols of hope, reminding everyone that even in the darkest times humanity could rise above adversity. As for Ethan, he continued to watch the horizon, knowing full well that challenges lay ahead. But he also knew that humanity wasn't alone. With courage, unity, and a little help from unexpected allies, they would face whatever came next, one sunrise at a time.